Hello everyone and welcome to our webinar Website Hosting Essentials for Small Business Owners. Glad to see you here today. My name is Gary and I'm the Community Manager of SiteGround. These days, most businesses have websites for their online presence, but are you sure that you're utilizing the full potential of your websites? And do you know which are the must-have components for your website hosting? We have Carl Evans with us today. And Carl is a renowned PHP and WordPress enthusiast, blogger, and author. He's here to tell us which are the important hosting ingredients that will set you up for success. But there are a few details about the webinar. The duration is 1 hour, 40 to 45 minutes presentation by Carl, and at the end, we will have a 10 to 15 minutes Q&A session. So if you have any questions on the topic, make sure to post them on the Ask section question below. As for the recording for the webinar, all registrants will get a link so you can rewatch it at a convenient time for you. Okay, and we look forward to your questions. Once Carl is done with the presentation, he will try to answer as many questions as possible within the webinar time frame. Okay, I'm leaving the stage to Carl. Take it away.
Hello, everybody. Hope you're having a wonderful morning. I'm watching the chat go by, and it's wonderful to see that Florida is well represented. I'm seeing Key West, I'm seeing Broward County, but most of all, I'm seeing my home, Palm Beach County. I am broadcasting to you live from my hidden lair here in Palm Beach County. I hope you find this a good investment of your time. Now, I will say this, I am minimizing the window with the chat in it, so I will not be able to respond to your chat because that's just distracting to me. But do me a favor, if you've got questions during the webinar, please ask them in the questions panel because the chat just scrolls away and I never see that again. But ask them in the questions panel. When I get done, I will get to as many of them as I can. So without further ado, let's talk about the essential ingredients for small business owners. Now, look, I've been hosting websites since 1996. For a long time, I actually ran my own hosting company. These days, I do not. These days, I host almost everything. Matter of fact, I think I host now everything with SiteGround, with the exception of my blog, which I accidentally deleted when I was trying to migrate it over to SiteGround. So I got to pull that from backups. Yay. Anyhow, but when I first set up my blog, I started looking for a web host, okay? And that was the last time I ever made that mistake, okay? There are thousands of companies out there that will host your website for you. And some of them are good, and some of them are not bad, and some of them are just plain terrible. But if you're looking for a web host, then sure, go for the lowest price provider. I've actually seen $5 a year web hosting, okay? But here's the thing, you get exactly what you pay for. See, I no longer look, when I'm helping a client find some place to park a website or to host a website, I don't look for a web host. I look for a hosting partner. I want somebody that is as committed to my site being up and fast and reliable as I am. I want it to be important to them. And so for the rest of this talk, you're going to hear me use the term hosting partner. And that's not just a turn of phrase or something that I use. I truly mean that. If you don't feel like your host is committed to making sure your site is up and reliable, it might be time to look for somebody. What does a hosting partner provide? Well, hosting partner provides three really important parts, okay? Number one, they're going to provide you a secure platform on which to build your website. Number two, they're going to provide you uptime, what we call uptime, just a technical term for making sure your site's online, okay? Literally, it's the amount of time your site is up and visible to people as opposed to down and crashed, okay? And the third thing they're going to provide you is fast. Okay, you want to make sure that your website is as absolutely as fast as it can be. Now, these are in this order for a reason, because if your website is online, but it's not secure, what's the point? Okay, it's going to get hacked. You're going to get hacked. People are going to do bad things. If you don't have a secure instance of WordPress, if you've not locked it down, then it doesn't matter how fast it is or the fact that it's online, because people are going to hack it almost immediately. You don't want that. So secure is the number one thing that you're looking for. The next thing is uptime. And then you want to make sure they can deliver your website to your clients as fast as it can possibly be. Let's talk about security first. Okay. Security is absolute number one. Now, there's a couple of different layers of security, and I do a lot of talking. I've done a lot of writing and a lot of videos for SiteGround on security. If you go out to their YouTube channel and look at my section, you'll see a couple of years worth of videos for security. And I highly recommend, if you're brand new to the web or to WordPress, go watch some of those, because this is the thing you got to nail. Now, your web host provider is responsible for the bottom layer of your security. Okay. They're going to make sure that the infrastructure is secure. But when it comes to your website, you're responsible for making sure that is secure. Now, I know for a fact that a lot of good hosting providers out there lock down the bottom layer so that it's difficult for bad actors to do things to your website. And that's what we're trying to do. And it's not so much that the common thing is comment spam. Those are easy to solve, okay? And it's not even somebody getting a login and deleting or putting up messages that you don't want on your website, because again, those are problems that we can solve. With security, what we want to make sure is that they're not using your website as a platform to attack others. If somebody gets access to the internals of your website, they can install a script on your site that attacks your users as they visit your site, and you don't want that. And they wouldn't know. It's not like something you can see. It's spinning through all of their cookies, their history, all of that, gleaning information. And the more sites that bad actors can be a part of, the more they can do this. And so that's why security is vitally important. These days, they also do things, but they will install the script on your clients' computers that will mine crypto coins for them. So you want to make sure that you're not using up your client's resources. Your client visits your website, and then all of a sudden the computer gets a lot slower. That's just one of the things that can happen. So for you, you have to make sure that your site is secure. Now, obviously, if you're letting people log in or subscribe to your site and log in as subscribers, you don't have to know everybody like that. On WordPress, we have editor, and that's usually access. They have access to do things. You want to make sure every person that has editor level, and especially at the admin level, you want to really limit the people that have admin level. Now, sometimes you'll have a developer come to you and say, I'm going to need admin access. And I did this just yesterday with a site. I said, to solve your problem, I'm going to need admin access. The answer to that is always, yep, not a problem, but you give them access as soon as the problem is solved. You delete that account. Okay. You don't leave that out there so that they can just access your site at any time. Also, I'm a firm believer in what we call two-factor authentication, or 2FA. You'll see 2FA out there a lot. SiteGround makes 2FA incredibly easy. They have their security plugin that if you check a box, then every person with admin access automatically has to have two-factor authentication. And it will walk them through setting it up. It's an app on your phone. And you, to log in, not only do they have to have their name and their password, but they have to have their phone so that they can put in a passcode to get in. This is incredibly important with administrator access. On any site where I'm doing e-commerce, it's a given that I have 2FA turned on. And the way I normally do it these days is with the SiteGround security plugin, just because it makes it so easy. I only do that with my admins. I don't usually do it with my editors. Although if you are selling subscription content and your editors are the ones creating the content and have serious access like that, it wouldn't be a bad idea to turn it on for editor and above as well. Security is very important. For the security underneath, most web hosts are doing things like evaluating the traffic coming in and looking for patterns that are only done, or things that are only done by bad actors. Okay. I know for a fact that SiteGround look at the URL, because the bad actors can put a lot of stuff in the URL, and they're looking for the patterns that are known to be attacks on websites, and they simply deny access to those people. So they are protecting you at that level. So at the infrastructure level, and they have everything locked down to the point where when developers have to SSH, and SSH is a tool that developers use to log into the underlying server that's running your site. When website, SSH is running on a non-standard port. And this is important because people scan websites and they look for SSH running on standard ports. When it's running on a non-standard port, it makes it that much harder. So all of these things, from the looking at the traffic to the SSH to the removing in accounts that are no longer needed that have special access to the two-factor authentication, these are the layers of the security onion that you've got to build for your website. Security is not just a castle wall and that's it. It's the castle wall, it's the castle moat, it's the parapet around, it's the archers on the wall. It's all in layers, and your web host should play their part in that. So the next thing is uptime. Whomever your web hosting partner is, check before you go with them, check their uptime record. It's as simple as going out to whatever your favorite search engine is. I use DuckDuck. Go out there and type in the name of the web host or their URL and the words uptime or uptime problems. Finding this stuff out is not hard, because when people are having a problem, they love to complain online. Now, you need to take everything you see online, of course, with a grain of salt. But if you see a lot of problems, maybe that's something that you need to look at. But your web host should have a record, a solid record of uptime. Now, uptime is really divided into two parts, okay? Your website is like an iceberg. What people see, that's the visible part of your website, and you're responsible for that. You're responsible for making sure WordPress is running. Your web host, though, is responsible for thousands of other pieces of software, everything from PHP and MySQL, which is the database, to making sure that the file system is operating properly, to making sure that the operating system itself is operating, to making sure the web server is operating. Each of these pieces of software have additional dependencies, and all of them not only have to be up and operating, but have to stay current, because if a vulnerability is found, then people will have to, if they're not updated, then that could put your site at risk. So this iceberg here, you're responsible for everything above the waterline, but your web host is responsible for a whole lot more. Now, why are you responsible for what's above the line? Especially with programs like WordPress, you can install things on your site that would make a difference in how things work. Just last week, I have a website that one of my applications on that website tracks high tides at one of my favorite scuba diving sites here in Palm Beach County. And I uploaded a new piece of code or an update to that code, because I had found a way to make it faster. Everything worked fine in testing, but when it rolled into production, that's on me, because I installed that plugin. It's a plugin I wrote, but I installed that plugin. That's not on SiteGround. That's not SiteGround's problem to solve. That's my problem to solve. And it took me about 30 seconds to realize, hey, I've got a problem here, and I knew exactly what the problem was. And I was able to very quickly update it and get it back up and running. But that's because I only host with hosts that give me the freedom to do whatever I want. Now, there are hosts out there, especially in the WordPress world, that will lock you down and say you can only use these plugins. Some of them have an approved list. Some of them just have a disapproved list. You can install anything you want except for this list. Okay. Hosts that treat me as an adult and say, look, you're an adult. If you want to install something that's going to affect the performance of your site. And I've actually installed plugins that made my site slower. But the host is, okay, that's on you. Okay. We're not going to stop you from doing it. If you want to do it, that's okay. And I appreciate that freedom. As a developer, I can usually fix the problems that I create. If you, however, are considering new plugins for your website, I strongly urge you to find either a WordPress implementer or a developer. If you've got a niece or a nephew that is computer savvy and you want them to help you, I've worked with friends and family to do this kind of stuff, but have somebody look at it before you upload it, just to make sure that they understand and somebody understands the impact it's going to have on your site. I absolutely hate installing new plugins and then finding out that my Google page score dropped by 2 points just because I installed this new plugin. Because at that point, I've got to decide, is the functionality that I just installed worth the points off my page speed? Because Google page speed is the standard for website speed. And if you don't know what your Google page speed is, you can install the SiteGround Optimizer plugin and just go over to the test my site, and it'll test it and show it to you automatically if you don't know how to do it on your own. That's one of the cool things about that plugin. Now let's talk about speed, okay? We've talked about security. If it's not secure, everything else is irrelevant. Once you've got it secure, it's got to be up, okay? Because even though everybody says you've got to have it fast, you got to have it fast, being available and being up is more important than being up and fast, okay? Once you get it secure and you get it stable, then we can start tweaking and playing with the different speeds. And I'm going to talk a lot about speed and some other stuff. So speed can be really broken down into basically 4 parts. First is resource utilization. This is all on your hosting partner. Okay, you can't do much to affect resource utilization. Resource utilization is a fancy way of saying that your database has enough memory so that it can run properly, but it's not hogging all the memory your web server and starving your web server. It's a balancing act, and web hosts have become very adept at spotting problems and being able to fine tune. When I started hosting with SiteGround, I got one of their plans and I started putting my stuff on there, and I noticed that everything seemed to be running just beautifully. So that's because underneath, I'm lucky enough so that I know their head of development, and I started talking with him, and underneath they've got people that all they do is sit there and figure these things out and fine tune their containers so that your website uses the resources absolutely as best as they can. This is also very important for environmental reasons. You don't want to spin up a server larger than you need, because the larger the server, the more energy it uses. So you want to spin it up exactly the size that you need without wasted resources. That's all under resource utilization. You can't do anything about it, but you can talk to your hosting partner before you host with them and make sure that they have tuned their containers so that everything is using as much of the resources available. You want a little spare because everybody has fluctuations in traffic and usage. So you want a little bit, but you don't want a whole lot of spare. The next is caching. Now, caching is simply taking things that are expensive time-wise or resource-wise and doing them and then storing the results. My favorite example to this is if you have a plugin that is showing your last 5 tweets from Twitter on your sidebar, that's expensive to go out to Twitter and query and say, give me my last 5 tweets, especially if you tweet 2 or 3 times a day. You don't want every time somebody loads that page to have to go out to Twitter and say, give me my last 5 tweets, because they haven't changed. So what we do is we say, go out and give me my last 5 tweets. You get those back, and then you store them locally, and you store them for an hour. Okay, which means if you tweet at the top of the hour every hour, then that's going to be out of date for a while, but your web page will run faster than if you have to query Twitter every time the page is loaded. That's called caching. We are caching it locally. Now, call to third-party APIs like Twitter, that's one thing we cache. We also cache full pages. Your website probably doesn't change for non-logged in users very often. So why rebuild that homepage every time? Because processor-wise and resource-wise, that's a very expensive process. For the average WordPress site, PHP will execute 1,000,000 lines of code or more. Well, if it's not going to change much between them, why do that every time? Why not do full page caching, or SiteGround calls it dynamic caching, which is we're going to do this once and we're going to store it for anywhere from 2 to 12 minutes, an hour, however long you want to store it. And that way, everything doesn't have to be rebuilt. Now, if we change something, we do what's called cache invalidation. We tell the system, hey, look, I've changed the homepage. Don't use the cache, build a new one, okay? So unlike when we're calling to Twitter, we can actually tell the cache system, rebuild it, and let's get a fresh cache, but then we're gonna keep that cache for a while. That's gonna cut way down on CPU that you have to utilize to serve your page quickly. Then there's CDN, or content delivery networks. Now, they're very similar to caches. They're related to caches. When I talk about caching, wherever your website is hosted, the cached information is stored locally right there, okay, on that server. With a CDN, we can say we want to build that cache, but we want to push it out to the edges of the network. An example is if your website is hosted in London, but you have a visitor from Las Vegas here in the US, your entire website has to transit across the Atlantic and all the way across the country to get to Las Vegas. However, a CDN has servers spread geographically around the world. So if you're using a CDN that has a server in Chicago, whenever you build a cache of your homepage, that's pushed out to Chicago. And whenever anybody requests that is closer to that Chicago server than to your server, it comes out of that Chicago server. So as you can see, instead of having to travel all the way across the Atlantic and most of the way across the US, it's just got to go from Chicago to Las Vegas. That's going to be much faster. If you have hero graphics, very large graphics on your website, if you have videos on your website, any large scale files that don't change very often, those are great candidates for pushing out to a content delivery network. Now, there are a lot of good CDNs out there that are third-party CDNs. And if you've got a developer on staff, you can examine all of your options there. However, that requires a knowledge of technology and a knowledge of what we call DNS, or domain name systems, that most non-technical site owners don't have. So if you're going to look at a CDN, you've really got two choices. You can go with a third party and have somebody set that up for you, or if your web host has a CDN already integrated, use that one. And in most cases, when you're using a integrated CDN, it literally is the flick of a switch, and boom, you're now using the content delivery network. I hosted one of my sites, my scuba diving site, and turned on their new beta of their CDN, and literally got 5 points on Google PageSpeed just for turning on that CDN. Okay. That's all it took. And I'm talking the basic CDN. I wasn't even using any of the premium features yet. That was just flicking the switch and then retesting, and it went up 5 points just for that. That's huge. Okay. So if you are not using a CDN and speed is important to you, and quite honestly, if you're doing e-commerce, speed is important to you. If you don't think so, then you need to do some more research. But if you're doing e-commerce, speed is important to you. Check out and make sure that your web hosting partner has a CDN available. Some work with third-party CDNs and integrate them. Others, like SiteGround, have built the infrastructure out themselves. They control the entire thing, and it's very tightly knit. But whichever one you do, make sure you're looking at that. And then finally, in speed, we've got web hosting optimization, or website optimization. Now, website optimization has several different parts to it. First, and this is the one that everybody associates with it, is your graphics might be too big. Okay. If you have not run an optimization program on your graphics, there's a good chance that you're pushing graphics to your users that are too big. And by too big, what I mean is there's only a certain number of detail or a certain amount of detail that the human eye can see. So pushing any graphic that has more detail than the eye can see means it's too big, which means you're wasting bandwidth. And nobody likes to waste bandwidth, especially when we get into high bandwidth seasons. If you're doing e-commerce and a holiday season comes up, bandwidth is precious. You don't want to be using that too much. So you want to go through and make sure that your website is optimized, or all the graphics on your website are optimized. There's several good plugins to do this. I wrote one way back in the day that used a site called Web Page Test, and I still use Web Page Test, but I don't use it for their graphic optimization anymore. But they used to tell me, hey, this is not optimized. Here's the version that is. And then I wrote a plugin that checked every graphic in my system. And if I didn't have the optimized version, I'd simply download the new one and put it in there. These days, it's so much easier. The second plugin I install on every website, or the third that I install on every single website I host, is the SiteGround optimization plugin. The first one I install is the SiteGround security, because if it's not secure, there's no point in going any further. The second one that I install is, okay, I use Yoast on every site. That's just the second plugin that I install no matter what. But the third one is the SiteGround Optimizer, because it does a lot of these little things. Now, recently, they've also added that to convert your graphics to the new WebP format. Okay, Google released a new graphic format called WebP that is optimized specifically for the web. And the SiteGround Optimizer, you can flick a switch and say, convert all my graphics to that, and it will. And that makes them that much smaller. But even if you don't convert them, you can go through and tell it, analyze these graphics, and go ahead and downsize the ones that you can downsize, or optimize the ones you can optimize. Another part of website optimization is most websites have a lot of CSS and a lot of JavaScript. On UncleCal's.club.com, there are probably 6 or 8 CSS files and probably as many JavaScript files. And the JavaScript files have a tendency to be much larger. We're getting to the point where these days websites, it's not unusual for websites to download a meg or more of JavaScript. And that's just huge, okay? And it doesn't have to be. We can optimize our JavaScript and our CSS. The first thing you can do is neither JavaScript nor CSS require spaces at the end of the line or indents or anything like that. So one of the things that's a very common technique is just to remove all the spaces and carriage returns and make them absolutely as small as possible. And this really helps in transfer speed. But the other thing we can do is, once they're small, is combine them all into 1 or 2 files. When your website loads, the first thing it does is the service says, okay, browser, here's the HTML. And the browser then looks at it and parses the HTML and says, okay, I see that I need to request this JavaScript, this CSS, this image, all of this, and it starts making requests. In the early days, all you could do is make 2 requests at a time. Nowadays, I think HTTP 2, I believe, supports 10 requests at a time. But if you've got a lot of slider graphics and all of this stuff there, then it's got to wait in line to do all of that. And JavaScript and CSS, so if you've got 6 or 8 of those, then those have got to wait in line too. And all of that slows down your paint speed, how fast your website paints. And that's what Google wants. Google wants you to speed up that paint speed. So if you combine all of your CSS into 1 file, then instead of making 6 requests and waiting for all 6 to get there before it can paint, you make 1 request, okay? Now, you can go through, find all your CSS files. You can look at your source code, find all your CSS files, make them all into 1, put that 1 in your template and say, use this one instead. But you got to do that every time anything changes. That's a real pain in the rear end. These days, there are plugins that will do that for you automatically, and that's what you want to have. And the SiteGround Optimizer plugin is great at doing this. It does the exact same thing for JavaScript. Now, I will tell you, be careful with combining JavaScript files. Usually minifying JavaScript files, taking all the carriage return and spaces out, usually that's not a problem at all. But when you start combining them, you can cause your website to stop working. So step carefully, test everything, make sure that when you make a change, you test your site thoroughly to make sure it hasn't broken anything before you walk away, okay? But if you can minify and combine your JavaScript files, that's going to make those a lot faster. And then there's also, back to the images, there's what they call lazy loading. Usually, if you've got graphics that show up down your page where the user can't see yet because they've not scrolled down there, there's really no point in loading those until you need them. So what new browsers do, and WordPress and SiteGround both have tools to help you fine tune this, is they will load the top graphics, the graphics that are visible. Usually WordPress defaults to the top 3. SiteGround Optimizer changes that a little bit because there's some things that don't fit in that model. But they will load the first ones, and then the rest of them, they don't wait until the user scrolls. But what they do is after everything else is loaded and the screen is painted, then they start loading those. Because if you've got a news article and they're reading the news article, they're not going to scroll immediately. So why load those images and why slow down the entire paint of your website just for those images? So those are some website optimization tools that you can do. Like I said, there are good plugins out there that do them. In the 10 WordPress sites that I maintain, I've got 3 different ones running. Of the 3, it really does the best job, and it's by far the easiest to use. The other 2 that I'm using, I have very specific reasons for using those, and you're going to come across some edge cases every now and then, but I'd start with the SiteGround Optimizer and wait until you hit something that it can't do before you start dealing. Okay, now we've covered the basics. Those are the things that you've got to have. If your hosting partner can provide you a secure platform with high uptime and speed, then they're a real good candidate. Everything else we're going to talk about, this is just icing on the cake. So for tools, there's a couple different things. The first thing you want to check is, do they have a user configurable cron? Okay. And a cron is just a system by which the server wakes up every minute and says, do I have something to do? That's all it is, okay? And there's a very arcane, for those of us who do it via the config file, there's a very arcane way that we tell it, I want this particular job to run every Tuesday or every other Tuesday at 3:15 a.m., things like that. Now, WordPress has a cron built into it, but I hate using the WordPress cron because it requires people to actually be visiting your site. I have a personal poetry site. No, I will not tell you the URL to my personal poetry site, but I have a personal poetry site that gets visited when my mom or my wife want to see the poems. That's basically it, because it's written for my wife. So having WordPress cron do some basic housekeeping that needs to be run every night using the WordPress cron, that's not going to work because I might go weeks before somebody visits that site. So I make sure that my web hosting partner has a cron that I can use, and WordPress has a way that you can trigger the cron jobs to run, and I just have something that runs usually at midnight, or actually I rarely run it exactly at midnight. I'll run it at 12:04 or something like that, because if everything runs immediately at the top of any given hour, then your website's going to be real busy then and then die off. So spread out the love, okay? The next thing you want to make sure is that your web partner or your potential web partner gives you SSH access, secure shell access to your website or to the server underneath. This is vital if you have a developer. If you're a non-technical site owner and you don't plan on hiring a developer, you're just going to work with what you can do with WordPress. Lord, you can get most things done these days with just WordPress. Then SSH might not be important to you. But if you're going to have a developer, then you're going to want to make sure you have SSH access, because otherwise it's just going to drive them up the wall. Okay. And finally, some kind of web infrastructure control panel. SiteGround, this is what it looks like. I love this. I've got all the stuff that I need right over here, including devs, which on any given site, if I've got the tools pulled up, I've usually got the devs open because that's where I do things like control the version of PHP or install my SSH key and stuff like that. Those are the things that are important to me on a day-by-day basis. But you make sure that you've got access to do these other things. Then beyond that, make sure that, or ask them, do they provide DNS? SiteGround does. I don't use it, but I have specific reasons why. Unless you hit one of those edge cases, they provide a real good DNS service, but you want to make sure that whatever your web hosting partner is, make sure they can handle your DNS. The other thing is email. Now, there are web hosts out there that won't provide email. My mother-in-law is 90 years old, and her apartment complex just changed providers, and they have told her that they no longer provide email. Not all web hosts provide email. If they do provide email, make sure you've got the basics, okay? You obviously you want email accounts, okay? But then you also want to be able to set up automated forwarders and autoresponders. Autoresponders are like vacation response. One of my favorite things about going on vacation is writing my vacation responder. I've actually had people post on Twitter when I go off on vacation, hey, go email Cal real quick and watch his email or read his email vacation responder. It's just, it's an art with me, but I like that. But you're going to want autoresponders. And then one of my favorite things, and this is important for your developers, or if you've got something that really is more difficult, is you want what we call piping. And what this is, an email address that when an email comes into it, it sends that email to a program. Now, I've got a system by which I send out little tweets with, when I take a selfie, when I'm scuba diving, when I take a selfie with my dive buddy, I can send that selfie to a specific email address, and it takes the selfie, puts this nice little border around it, centers it, because I'm a horrible programmer and I don't always get everything centered, but it centers it, and then it saves it off onto, I think the website is selfieswithcal.com, and then it also tweets it out, okay? So I've got a program that if I send an email to this email address, then it says, oh, I'm going to process this, and that's what I'm going to do with it. And no, I'm not going to tell you the email address. That one was real important to me. And if you start getting into, you want to do stupid things like I do with email, you're going to want to make sure that your hosting provider provides you with piping, email piping. And also, and this one is difficult, spam protection, okay? There are two services that even on the one server I have left on the internet, there are two services I just will not provide for people, and that is DNS and email, because both of them are incredibly difficult to get, and when you get them wrong, things can go horribly bad. So with email, you really want to make sure that your service provider will provide you with spam protection, and that it is on automatically for any account. It is nice if you can turn it off. Like for piping, I don't need spam protection, because if it's not exactly the right thing, my pipe just throws it away. It doesn't do anything. Those are some nice to have tools. Once you've settled on the basics or the essential parts of web hosting, those are some nice to have tools that your hosting provider or your hosting partner can provide you with to make your life and your developer's life easy. A solid web host is important. Now, if your website is basically your refrigerator, okay, it's a place where you post your kids' art so the grandparents can see it and stuff like that, home pictures, and there's nothing wrong with that. I've got one of those. But if that's all you're using your website for, then sure, the $5 a year web hosting is going to be fine, because if it goes down, it's no big deal. But if you are selling a product, a service, or anything where there is commerce being traded, or even if it's just the front end for your business, you've got to make a good impression. You've got to make a quick impression. You've got to keep that thing secure. So picking the proper web hosting partner is very important. I've hosted with most of the major web hosts out there that will host WordPress. And I'm not going to say anything bad about any one of them, because some of them I didn't have a problem. I can say honestly to you that having moved everything now to SiteGround, this is the best hosting experience I've had including my own, because there are certain things that now I no longer have to deal with. I don't have to deal with DNS, and I don't have to deal with email and stuff like that. Managing those services, that's somebody else's problem. I can focus on the things that are important to me, making sure that the content that goes up on Uncle Cal's diveclub.com is the absolute best content it can be, and it convinces people to go buy towels and t-shirts and stuff like that, which is really the only point of that site. But that's the important part. I want to focus on that, not on all the underlying stuff, even though I have done that for 20 some odd years and could if I want to. If you're a non-technical site owner, you probably don't even have that option. You need to pay very close attention to who you hand over the keys to your website to. And like I said, SiteGround is absolutely one of my favorites. Okay. How'd I do? Okay. I always figure I have about 10 minutes worth of content. It always ends up being quite a bit more. So anyhow, that concludes the webinar. Now let's answer some of the questions. Let's see. Ian would love to know the ideal setup for using SiteGround dashboard tools and WordPress functionality. Honestly, it really depends on what you're doing. Okay, there's so many options that I just can't go through all of them for you. The one thing I can tell you is, number one thing you should do, get that SiteGround secure plugin set up. Even if you're not hosting on SiteGround, that one will work. Okay, there's some of the options that won't, but you can still use it. But get that installed, and then second, get SiteGround Optimizer installed, and one at a time, turn each option on, and then go test your site. And then turn another option on and test your site. Make sure, if you're with SiteGround, make sure you've turned on Memcache on the tool set, and then go over to SiteGround Optimizer and turn it on there, so that, because that will just speed up so much underneath in the WordPress internals. I don't want to go into detail about what all that does, but it's just, it speeds up an awful lot of stuff. Okay, let's see. Tina, I've turned on HTTPS Enforce, but it doesn't show the HTTPS in the search bar. Can you please tell me why? Yes, because the browser companies stopped showing us the protocol. That's called the protocol. They've stopped showing us the protocol. Now, normally these days, if your site is not available via HTTPS, there'll be a little exclamation point or a lock with a line through it. There'll be some indicator, but everybody assumes security these days. So if you're not seeing anything there, then that means you are running the secure site. Usually, if you put your cursor up in the site, the URL bar, it will expand all of it and it'll give you the protocol over there. Okay, let's see. Laura, I love this one. An acquaintance built my WordPress site, and now I'm scared to update it, especially the themes, because of the settings, especially the ones I don't understand. I'm with you on that, okay? I've been using WordPress since we built our own themes. These days, it's way too difficult to build your own themes, and some of these things just scare the bejesus out of me. Okay, running a website is a lot harder than writing. Totally agree with you there. What I would suggest to you, Laura, is if you're on SiteGround, create a staging site. You flip a switch, okay? And then install the updates on the staging site and see if anything breaks. If nothing breaks, then it's safe to install it on production. If something breaks, then by all means, don't install it on production until you fix the stuff that breaks. That's what staging sites are for. Okay, and SiteGround makes it real easy. It's like a flick of a switch, and it's going to have a different URL. It's not the same system at all, but it mirrors your production system. Okay, we're trying to build out our email list for our weekly newsletter. Can we do that through our website? Dave, that's a little bit vague. I don't know if you want to build out your newsletter through your website, or if you want to actually send your email or send your newsletter through your website. Both are possible if you're using WordPress. I will point you to, and SiteGround hopefully is listening, and we'll put a URL in the bottom. I just wrote an e-commerce primer for them. It's 10 chapters and 10 videos, and it is free of charge, but that covers email. So you might want to check that out. Okay, would love to know how to create a site for a podcast and be able to sell services on it. I do a lot of podcasting. Peter, check out the Blueberry podcast plugin. Now, there's free and there's paid subscription. I've been using the free for probably 5 years. Absolutely love those people. Okay. Is it important to have your hosting server located in the country your business in? No, not anymore, believe it or not. If you're deploying a CDN, then what's important is that your hosting partner has a CDN with a wide network of what we call points of presence, okay, or POPs. So if you are using a host and they've got a CDN, but they've got two POPs, London and Chicago, and their main system is in Amsterdam, no, that's probably not going to do it. But if they've got 20, 30, 50, 100 POPs, then where your actual service is located is much less important because the big stuff is coming out of the CDN. Okay, is this advice strictly for people using WordPress site, or is the information useful to those using HTML, CSS, and others to develop their sites? And I apologize, I'm not even going to try to pronounce your name because I will butcher it and just make me look bad. No, the information I've given you, the concept of CDNs, the concepts of caching, the concepts of uptime, these are all generic web hosting concepts. I have given you examples in WordPress, but that's just because that's what I use the most when I'm building stuff. If you are building your own in HTML, caching and CDN is still equally important, but you or your developer is going to have to build all that stuff out manually. And honestly, that's the reason I use WordPress as a framework for building stuff on, is that way I don't have to build all this stuff manually. Okay, how are we doing? 11:54. Yeah, we can do some more. What are the names of site optimizers again, besides the Go to WordPress.org, click on plugins, and type optimize. As a general rule, I do not recommend specific plugins because there's a lot of good ones out there. And if I recommend one, then other people are going to gripe at me because I didn't recommend their favorite. If you go out there and check them out, there's a lot of people that review them and they can tell you. Again, I can tell you on 7 of the 10 WordPress instances that I have, SiteGround Optimizer is my optimizer plugin. And for the other 3, there are, like I said, edge cases that I, for one reason or another, use something else or use something in addition to SiteGround Optimizer. What else do we have? We want to add a page where folks can access our new podcasts. We have the first 5 recorded, but haven't uploaded them yet to a hosting platform. Is that something that can be covered? Dave, whenever I'm talking to people that are getting into podcasting, the first thing I tell them is before you even announce, record your first 10 episodes. Most podcasts fade within their first 10. If you can get that first 10 in there and scheduled, then you're ahead of the game. The second thing is, if you're using WordPress as your platform, go ahead and schedule the posts. And if you've got Blueberry or something like that, what I always do is create a coming soon episode, post that. And once that's available, then you can go ahead and start submitting your podcast to Spotify and to Apple and to Google and I think Amazon these days and Alexa and all that you can send it out to. But they all want to see at least one episode. If you don't have that first episode ready to publish yet, that coming soon episode is enough to do that. And then get those first 10 in there, go ahead and get them scheduled, and you'll be well on your way. Okay, let's see. I think I got time for one more. My site crashed a couple months ago. An IT rep from another hosting site told me that my domain name, when typed, directed the user to Google's hosting site and no longer directs the user to my websites hosted at SiteGround for many years. I've tried to fill out the ticket. I can tell you that the IT rep, what they were looking at was that basically they used a tool that we call Ping, and it gives you the name, but it also gives you the host name, and the host name had the word Google in it. And that's what confused them. And that is absolutely not true. It's still hosted by SiteGround if SiteGround is your host. SiteGround underneath uses the Google infrastructure. Some hosts use the Amazon, some hosts use I forget the other one, not Red Hat, but something like that. Platform, SiteGround uses the Google infrastructure for all of their hosting, and they saw that Google in there and said that's the problem. No, I can't fix it for you, but if you don't have a ticket open already, go ahead and open a ticket. Honestly, I've had to use, in 3 years I've been hosting with SiteGround, I've had to use support 3 times. 2 of those times I wanted to do something that they didn't allow, and that was on me. I was, as a developer, I wanted to do something strange, and I'm fine with them not allowing me to do the strange. The other time I actually did have a problem. I used their chat system, And they were there within about 30 seconds. It took about 5 minutes to solve it. And I gave the guy 5 stars. And since I know their head of support, I actually wrote their head of support and told them what a great job they did, because they just did a phenomenal job. If it's their problem, they're quick to fix it. Okay, that's all we got. Hey, everybody, I want to say thank you for spending time with us today. I hope you have found it to be a useful and valuable investment of your time. And do me a favor, there's a button over there that says click on our YouTube channel. A lot of these webinars that I've produced for them over the past 2 or 3 years are all out there. Go check those out, because those answer some of the questions that you've been asking. And make sure you get a copy of our new e-commerce primer that's available for free. Like I said, it's a book with 10 chapters and 10 videos. And I will turn it back over to you.
Okay, thank you so much for this detailed presentation, Kao. I personally learned a lot. Hopefully our viewers also found the information useful. Anyone who registered for this event will get an email tomorrow with the link, so you can rewatch the webinar whenever you have more time. We hope to see you again at our next webinar. Stay curious and stay safe.